So this article says that Trump sought options for attacking Iran to stop its growing nuclear problem. The president was dissuaded from moving ahead with a strike by advisors who warned that it could escalate into a broader conflict in his last weeks in office. Now, I want to point out that in this article, the sources they name, which, these news outlets are not good these days at naming sources, and I don't think you should always have to name sources. Oftentimes, sources need to be protected, but it gets to a point of ridiculous when you never name a source and you never have, you just have somebody inside the White House and, you don't know what level and where were they. And that's kind of what's happened here. So they go on and they say, and the first thing that stood out to me in this article as I read it was that this information came from, they said here, 4 current and former U.S. officials. First of all, former U.S. officials wouldn't know anything. They're not there, right? They're former U.S. officials. And the current, they don't say who or where, or were they in the meeting, or what level, or were they even in the building? We don't know. And we don't know of these 4, how many were former and how many were current. So that's the first thing that stands out to me in this article. But they essentially say, if you're not familiar with this story, let me just go ahead and read some of this to you. And then I'm going to show you how Fox News actually came back with sources who were in the meeting, and 2 sources who were in the meeting, and they said that is not what happened. Trump did not look for information on how to strike Iran. He was given this information because we give all options when we're in these meetings, and nobody had to dissuade him out of this. That is all, just not true. So here's what the New York Times said. They said, President Trump asked senior advisors in an Oval Office meeting on Thursday whether he had options to take action against Iran's main nuclear site in the coming weeks. The meeting occurred a day after international inspectors reported a significant increase in the country's stockpile of nuclear material, 4 current and former U.S. officials said on Monday. So now, look, to everybody's credit, Trump has been a total war hawk against Iran. He's been extremely aggressive. He's been agitating them, antagonizing them. He is definitely, killing General Soleimani, attacking oil tankers. A lot of the stuff they said, oh, it wasn't us, but really we all knew, okay, come on. It was either you or it was Israel, because we know Israel's been the one who's been advocating for getting out of that Iran nuclear deal and trying to get regime change done in Iran. And Trump has, as we've noticed in these 4 years, and I've been very, very critical of him over these last 2 years since I've been doing this show, that he takes it all the way up to the line. He goes right up to that line of pushing them, but he does not cross it into war. He hasn't done that. And if he wanted to do that, guys, he had every opportunity to, because we all know that John Bolton was screaming in his ear to start that war. And Trump actually, where's this news story here? He actually fired Bolton because he didn't want anything to do. Here's the story. Says Trump scorches Bolton, says fired hawk would have started World War VI. You're skipping a few wars there, buddy. But for a guy who couldn't get approved for the ambassador to the UN years ago, couldn't get approved for anything since, begged me for a non-Senate approved job, which I gave him despite many saying, don't do it, sir. Takes the job mistakenly, says Libyan model on, I don't know. This tweet is so weird. And many more mistakes of judgment, gets fired because, frankly, if I listened to him, we would be in World War VI by now, and goes out and immediately writes a nasty and untrue book, all classified national security. Who would do this? Well, John Bolton would do this. And by the way, in John Bolton's book, he gets mad at Donald Trump for not being war hawkish. He's like, oh, this guy wants to get the troops back home. Do you know how dangerous that is to bring the troops back home? How dare this man? He just wants to willy-nilly take them all back. Yeah. So the New York Times is saying that Trump was given these options and that these guys had to talk him out. They said here, a range of senior advisors dissuaded the president from moving ahead with a military strike. The advisors, including Vice President Mike Pence, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, Christopher C. Miller, the acting defense secretary, and General Mark A. Milley, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, warned that a strike against Iran's facilities could easily escalate into a broader conflict in the last weeks of Mr. Trump's presidency. So they're saying, oh, look at all these guys. They had to talk Trump out of it. He's just such a warmonger that these guys, Mike Pompeo, had to talk him out of it. Okay. So I read this story alongside many others who read it and said, oh, no, look, Trump's not really anti-war. Look at this story from the New York Times, says all these progressives who know the New York Times is totally biased and often is not true. So if you just wait a minute, more information always comes out, especially when reports are coming out like this from one source. So, of course, we just waited a minute. All we had to do was wait a day. Didn't take that long this time. And Fox News comes out with sources. They actually spoke to him because they have the inside track, like I mentioned. And so because of that, they were able to speak to people who were in the room. So let me find it here. Fox News says the New York Times was first to report on the meeting. Senior advisors urged Trump not to pursue a military strike against Iran. According to the New York Times report, the officials warned that an attack could spark a larger military conflict with Iran in the coming weeks. But, here's the big but, two senior administration officials, both of whom were in the Iran meeting with the president about a week ago, told Fox News that Trump did not ask for options to strike against Iran and that officials did not have to talk him out of it. So right there, before we move on here, because they'll tell you, they name names, but what they're saying is they've got sources who were in the room, whereas New York Times says people who were familiar with the meeting or current and former officials. No indication of how these officials heard or knew anything, okay? So it says right here, Fox News is told that at the request of National Security Advisor Robert O'Brien, NSC Middle East Chief Rob Greenway brought into the meeting charts of possible strike options. So right there, the two senior administration officials who were in the room said that no, it was Robert O'Brien, the national security advisor, who requested these options, and the NSC Middle East chief, Rob Greenway, brought those options into the meeting of possible strike options. He says, Fox News goes on to say that they're told that Greenway was instructed to bring the charts in as a contingency, that you always want to go into the Oval fully prepared for any scenario. That makes a lot of sense. I mean, listen, Trump has never been shy about really anything, if you haven't noticed from the guy's Twitter account. So if he was thinking about striking Iran, or if he was thinking about going after them, it probably, I guess I don't know if we got any indication about Soleimani. So maybe he wouldn't say anything, but he often says something like, hey, Iran, we know what you're up to, and so we're coming after you. And he's kind of, he's just like a loudmouth. He says whatever he thinks. So, but look, at the end of the day, it doesn't matter whether he would say something or not and indicate something was going to happen or not. It doesn't make any sense. He recently got rid of Mark Esper, who didn't want to bring the troops home, replaced him with Christopher Miller, who wants to bring them home, wrote a letter out on Friday saying, time to end the war, it's time to come home. Trump had Bolton around him and many, many other war hawks around him who were absolutely thrilled if he would go into war, and he never did. He just proved himself over and over to not really want to go to war. If he wanted to win a second term in this presidency, he would have gone to war. Everybody knows if you want to win a second term, just go to war. It helps. It helps. So that would have increased his chances, yet that didn't happen. So I have been extremely critical of this guy and his foreign policy, which has been devastating for Venezuela and for Iran. The sanctions, the antagonizing, the CIA sort of black ops style operations of messing with their electrical grids and sabotaging power plants and various other facilities inside of Iran. Now, I don't know for sure if it was the United States or if it was other actors that were doing it, in conjunction or what, but we know that these nations have been under attack, that people want regime change in these countries, and that they have gone to great lengths to try to make their lives miserable in order to get them to move along and to put in a new Western-friendly government. But Trump has stopped short of war, and so that it is what it is. That is a good thing to not go to war. All those other things are not so great, but not going to war is a good thing. So that is the truth of what happened here. We just needed to wait for a little bit more information. And of course, New York Times comes out with one story and Fox News goes and double checks it and says it's not true. The people that were in the room say, you just give them all options. That probably happens every single meeting for everything. You know that the war hawks and the Pentagon and all of these military industrial complex folks are always bringing in military strike options to every meeting. They're probably saying, well, sir, we've got a plethora of options for you that range from do nothing and look like a pansy all the way to starting World War VI. I'm sure they've got every option that they bring to the president, and then the president, the commander-in-chief, would get to choose from those options. That's sort of what you do for your boss. You can then say when you're in the room, look, here's all the options. We don't really recommend all of these. This is the one we think is the best, but here's all the options. But being given all the options doesn't mean you're considering it or there's some real risk there. And that needs to be understood. So I think that the New York Times did piss poor reporting on this for not actually getting sources that were in the room. But you know what? They're for clickbait. They're just trying to rile up a group of people that are reading their newspaper. And look, a lot of reports have been coming out that Trump's been wanting to bring the troops home, that he's looking like he's going to end the wars. And I'm sure they wanted to counter that with a no, this guy is dangerous. We've been telling you for 4 years he has his finger on that nuke button. He's going to use it. We've been telling you. So they're still trying to go down that road for the last 60, I guess they're going to continue to do this in the last 60 days of his presidency. So that's what we can expect. So that's the truth of that story there.